Park not to do this march. WAAY 31's Will Robinson-Smith has been there since the very beginning. Will, we just saw a very dramatic scene with WAAY 31's Stephen Delcizian. What's happening where you're at?
Yeah, so we're just on the we're on the north side of the Huntsville Utilities building right now. We were actually coming down Spring Street to rendezvous with some of our crew, get some equipment, and that's when we started to smell it first and then really feel the effects of some of that tear gas wafting over Big Spring Park down our direction. I think for better or for worse, because I was in the cloud of it earlier tonight, the little bit that was just wafting didn't hit me quite as hard as it did some of my colleagues that, for them, this was the first time they were experiencing tear gas this evening. It is not a pleasant sensation. As Stephen was describing, it burns the eyes, the mouth. You feel it tingling on your skin as it is wafting over you. Right now, step out of frame. You can see right now you're taking a look at this is Clinton, I believe, that we're looking at right here, the street along Big Spring Park that divides Big Spring Park east and west. Excuse me, this is Church Street that you're looking at, Church Street, where you can see a group of Alabama state troopers that are gathered and regrouping after a night where things started off peacefully, and then over time, the tensions built, the protesters refused to leave, and the tear gas got deployed, and a lot of people felt firsthand what that experience is like. It is not a sensation that you want to go through.
Have you been able to eyeball any protesters right now? Are they still out there that you can see?
So from our vantage point, we can see both Spraggins and Church Street from here. And from this particular spot, we're in the parking lot normally reserved for Huntsville Utilities employees. Right now, there aren't any employees or protesters here. They've all been pushed pretty much north of our position at this point, somewhere beyond there. We saw a couple of people that were walking out of Big Spring Park that looked like they got some of the remnants of that tear gas like we did. They were rubbing their eyes. They had some water. But as far as any large groups, we haven't seen any groups bigger than maybe 5 or 6 people at this point.
And from your perspective, does it catch you by surprise, or are you caught off guard by how quickly things have escalated within the last 45 minutes?
Right before the tear gas started coming out at, when we were up on the square, it seemed like somehow the protesters were refusing to move. The police obviously were holding their ground. No one was really giving any way. And as I mentioned before, the police gave multiple verbal warnings, used that blaring siren, trying to get people to leave. The protesters refused to do so. And so at a certain point, you kind of got the sensation that something had to give at a certain point. And, we were standing beside Huntsville police at one point, maybe 15, 20 minutes before the tear gas actually started getting deployed. You saw them take a knee and then put on their gas masks, come back up and take their position. And then they waited. And then there were at least 1 or 2 more verbal warnings giving protesters another chance and another chance to try to leave this moment peacefully, to not have to resort to using tear gas. Again, the protesters didn't give ground, and the tear gas came out.
And police did not harass the reporters at all. We've seen some of those examples over the past week or so in other cities, but that did not happen to you.
Yeah, that's right, Dan. Where we were, there were a couple of other news crews that were by us, some photographers as well as news television crews. And, Huntsville Police and the Madison County Sheriff's Office, they were very cordial with us as far as, telling us if we needed to move back a little bit, to give them some space. We kind of got some signals about what was about to happen. I mean, we didn't get a full warning saying, hey, you might want to leave. There's going to be tear gas, lobbed just down the street. But, they didn't fire tear gas directly at us. We saw, I believe it was in Kentucky, where some pepper bullets were fired at a reporter. That wasn't the scene here. We happened to be caught up in it because we were so close to the nexus of everything that was happening. But at no point did it feel like law enforcement was specifically targeting the media.
And will you describe that moment when police got on the knee before they launched that tear gas into the crowd? Can you describe the next moments? Hundreds of people were in that space, so did they all just start running, or describe what happened next?
Well, there was, sorry, we're going to move out of the way. There's a car that's trying to leave their parking space. Understandably, it's been a busy night, and, traffic has been kind of locked down, so people are slowly starting to leave the area, so we're just going to give them some space to do so. I'm sorry, can you repeat your question?
Describe the next moments. You painted the picture for us of police kneeling before they launched that tear gas into the crowd. We know there were hundreds of people there, so what happened next?
Yeah, so when the first canister was launched by the Madison County Sheriff's Office, again, this was on the south side of the courthouse. It was launched onto Fountain Circle, and then the protesters there, they started, running toward our position. We moved toward the wall where the businesses were, and, at first people just started backing up, not really realizing what was happening, and then one bang went off, then another bang went off, and then people started corralling near the intersection of Fountain Circle and West Side Square, and that's when the Huntsville police lobbed one of the tear gas canisters at the protesters. They kicked it back at Huntsville police. Huntsville police kicked it back into the crowd, and at that point, then more tear gas started. They started to, slowly advance down West Side Square Street, and we were kind of caught up in the middle of it, because we had law enforcement on our right coming down Fountain Circle. We had Huntsville police moving this way, so we were just trying to figure out where we could go safely. Obviously, our eyes were burning, our throats were burning, because we were right in the heart of where the smoke was and the tear gas was coming from. So we just grabbed some water, doused our eyes, asked law enforcement, where can we go that is safe right now? And they directed us down the west side of the courthouse. And we rendezvoused with our colleagues there, made sure everyone else was okay. And that was sort of how things proceeded. Huntsville police started, making their way north across the courthouse and, down the street.
It looks like Huntsville police did a pretty efficient job, really, of clearing out downtown. And I don't imagine it took more than 25, 35 minutes to do that, to clear all the streets around downtown.
Yeah, I think they were trying to make a point of things needed to clear out from their perspective, that the rally had been over officially for some time, and they wanted things to clear and some sense of order to be restored to the front of the courthouse, and for protesters to leave as they were being asked to. They didn't move quickly. It was a very slow advance as tear gas, kept moving into the crowd. You saw waves of people. Some people, left immediately at that point. Some people stayed, tried to get some footage on their cell phones, on other cameras. But, the more tear gas they used, people, just realized that there was no staying at that point. Like, everyone had to leave, and especially once police got up to their position, that was pretty much the end of it. But like you said, Dan, it was a long process of trying to coordinate with all the various agencies to make sure that there wasn't any type of physical confrontation, in the sense that anyone was punched or kicked in that way, as police moved their way down.
You mentioned physical confrontations. Will, was there any indication that any of these protesters were throwing anything at police? Water bottles or rocks or bricks or anything like that?
No, and as we reported earlier in the week, there were some rocks by the courthouse square. Those have been cleared, so we didn't see any projectiles beyond that one canister of tear gas that a protester, tried to chuck back at law enforcement. We didn't see any bottles or anything like that was, used to try to spark, a confrontation between law enforcement and the protesters here that we saw.
First spoke with you hours ago. You brought us the scene of nearly 1,000 people filling Big Spring Park, standing in solidarity for the killing death of George Floyd. Describe the contrast between the feeling of that event and what you've been experiencing within the last hour or so here at the courthouse.
Well, I mean, as you were asking the question, we just actually saw these two gentlemen you see walking toward that sea of blue lights, just throughout the chant Black Lives Matter. That was kind of, the sense of solidarity carried from one event to the other. It felt like things really hit a tipping point where the protesters wanted some change. They wanted some tangible thing to happen for them to be able to, I think, take away from this moment. And I think from what I was watching and listening, it seemed like they were unwilling to leave because it felt like they weren't given any ground in that moment. As you can see, law enforcement still out here on Church Street, making their presence known. Dan and Najahe, you asked about, an all clear earlier on. We're not sure when. These are Alabama State Troopers vehicles you're seeing here right now. We're not sure when they're going to clear this part of the street. Spraggins behind us is clear of law enforcement, but this is the scene you're seeing right now. But it was really unclear exactly when the shift happened, but some of my colleagues mentioned the Confederate statue. That was something that was brought up during the protest and during this dialogue and conversation down at Big Spring Park. Wanting to see some reform, talking about voting, being active in this moment. When we were up on the square, they mentioned, or they called for Huntsville police, take a knee. Take a knee was something that was repeated multiple times in various chants throughout the evening, and neither the Madison County Sheriff's Office nor Huntsville police that we saw, ever took a knee, and that was something that I think, may have helped to quell some of the protesters, maybe with some small gesture that they wanted to see. It seemed very unlikely that anything was going to happen with the Confederate statue tonight. We saw the monument in Birmingham that was dismantled. I know that is a hope for a number of people here in Huntsville and Madison County. Again, that was talked about at some length, as my colleagues have mentioned. It's unclear exactly what the future of that Confederate monument will be, but I think that's something that the protesters here tonight and the ones watching from home are going to keep an eye on closely.
Well, you noticed children in the crowd, especially early on in this protest at Big Spring Park. Some of the parents saying, well, this was important for us to bring our children down here to show what civil disobedience essentially looks like in the proper perspective. Hopefully all those children left before it really got dangerous. Was that the case? Did you notice any kids in the crowd?
Dan, I sincerely hope that the children had gone by that point. From what we could see, we could really just see the front line of the protesters, from our vantage point up at the courthouse corner. And from that perspective, it didn't seem like there were many children. I think I saw maybe a couple down the street on Fountain Circle, kind of toward Big Spring Park. But, from what we could see, there weren't a lot of children up front. And so, I think the hope is that some of the parents may have taken them away from the protest at that point once they saw that things were going to stand off until who knows when. But, we didn't see a lot of children up front.
Essentially what we've been seeing in cities all around the country is that the protests are peaceful up until a point where the sun starts to set, and as it gets darker, people seem to be emboldened maybe more by the darkness, and that's when things start to get dangerous.
Yeah, I think just tensions were, it was a hot day. It was very humid after some of the rainstorms, and so I think potentially that the heat added some elements of, people's feelings and of this moment. It literally just reached not exactly a boiling point because the protesters didn't try to advance on police in any kind of hostile way, but they clearly were not ready to back down until the tear gas started coming.
And well, when we spoke with you earlier, you described seeing a crowd of nearly 1,000 people at Big Spring Park at the peaceful protest organized by the NAACP. We've heard some people did disperse at that point. About how many people would you say made the journey to the downtown courthouse?
From where we were up above, it seemed like, we could only see about half of the crowd from our aerial vantage point, but I would say a good majority of them at some point or another made their way to the square, that they were, marching around that part of the courthouse. It seemed like there was a lot of translation from down in the park, up the stairs or around the corner, up into the courthouse square. There seemed to be a lot of people that, they were here to listen to the speakers. They were here to, have their signs, help be a part of the message, show their solidarity, but they also wanted to march, and they also wanted to be a part of that part of the protest. I think that was, something that a lot of people, wanted to make a point to not leave, especially, seeing how many people turned out on Monday night. I talked with a number of protesters who were saying, they were there Monday night. It was important for them to be back tonight, and they were happy to see how many more people there were who had come out, to make their voices heard as part of tonight. Obviously, no one necessarily wants the way this ended with tear gas and people being, forced back because their eyes are burning. But I think a lot of people, wanted to be a part of this moment, and that included marching from Big Spring Park up to the courthouse square.
And Will, you mentioned that you actually saw community activists and city leaders reaching out to the protesters and asking them to disperse.
Yeah, they along with police, they really tried to, they made sure that people who were, trying to come a little bit closer to police, they were keeping their distance. There was both community activists, there was some private security that we saw, as well as uniformed law enforcement officers. And, the activists, and some of the organizers, I think, of the event were really trying to keep folks on the message that this started with, that this was a moment of solidarity with those in Minneapolis and around the country who are protesting the killing of George Floyd, who are justifiably angry about what happened to him, as well as a whole host of other issues for the Black community. And, they just wanted to be a part of this moment here tonight.
You mentioned in one of your emails back to the station earlier today, Devin Keith's impassioned speech, you called it, to the protesters. Those are the pictures we showed earlier with everybody with their fists in the air. Can you describe what he was saying at that time?
Yeah, so when Devin Keith came, out to the podium, he wasn't actually one of the people who was listed on the roster of scheduled speakers. And, he made a point to say, well, he asked for everyone to raise a fist. And at that point, the crowd was pretty quiet. It was almost silent as he was speaking, as they were listening to him. And he said, this fist represents not just you, this represents the community. This represents mothers and fathers, people that are your neighbors and the entire Huntsville community. This fist is powerful, and you need to understand what this represents. It was a call to calm protests, and I think, Councilman Devin Keith was trying in that moment, as many other speakers were as well, to really hopefully instill a sense of calm amid the protests, understanding that there is, an anger that a lot of people are feeling right now, but to know that, to look around and see that there was a collective, that everyone that was down there was all unified in raising a fist, or they had their signs up, and to say there are things that we can do constructively together, that this is all part of our community. And it from above, seeing the wide number of people that were in that moment, it felt like that was a moment that really resonated with all the people that were listening. As I mentioned, it was not exactly completely silent, but darn near close.
And well, we've talked a lot on a personal level, as well as a journalist and as a person, about all the things happening across the United States with the killing death of George Floyd. Was there a moment or a takeaway that sort of is imprinted in you that you'll never forget from today?
I think Devin Keith's speech was definitely a moment. A lot of the speakers, hit on various points of why folks came out today. It was some that are frustrated with how the government is run, state, local, federal. Others that are, just furious at what happened to George Floyd. And, you know, it was just in those moments of silence when, you know, everyone collectively was listening. Because, I mean, there were a lot of moments where people cheered together, where they chanted, Black Lives Matter, hands up, don't shoot, no justice, no peace, things that we've heard echo. I think for me, the moment that I really just, it stands out was just when things were just silent, when people were listening to each other. That was just a moment where, you know, there's so much energy happening right now, you know, for a lot of us, and just hearing that stillness that people were taking in what was happening at that moment was, I think that was the point for me. That was the most powerful.
Yeah, it was truly impactful to see nearly 1,000 people gathered in silence with their arms raised. Something else I noticed, Will, was the diversity of the crowd, the people who came out. It wasn't just all African Americans. It was a very diverse crowd, people expressing their just concern with what's happening right now.
Well, that's exactly right. The crowd could not have been farther from monolithic. It was black, white, Hispanic, Latinx. I imagine some Native American folks in there as well. Just a whole swath of people of various ages and backgrounds that were, you know, all feeling just the overwhelmingness of the moment, and the sense that I think that unity can bring. And a lot of people just wanted to be a part of that. You know, as we saw the protests start, you know, with the first one on Saturday, and then we saw, you know, some on Sunday in Decatur and in Athens, in Florence, and in Fort Payne, continuing on to Monday. You know, as I've been, you know, watching these protests and helping with our coverage, the crowds keep growing, the fervor keeps growing, and people keep getting, I think, more invested in what's happening, you know, in their community. And I think the community organizers, the ones speaking tonight, and certainly I talked to one of the activists afterward, she was telling me that, you know, she hopes that tonight is not just a moment of, you know, energy that is encapsulated just in this single space, in this single moment in time, that this carries forward, that people understand why they came out, what this energy is like, and that they continue to work to bring about the change that a lot of them say that they really want. And, you know, if they want things to be different for their lives, you know, this activist said, you know, you need to register to vote, you need to be involved in your community, talk with your neighbors. You know, it's a, you know, a time, you know, old expression, but, you know, treat others as you'd like to be treated yourself, and, you know, just be a part of the change you want to see.
Well said. Will Robinson-Smith, thank you very much for that analysis and your personal introspection on the events tonight. We hope people remember how this started rather than how it ended.
Here's hoping. Thanks, Dan, Naja.
We want to go now.